had been years since I'd sat down with my son, Rick, and his wife, Emma. The past had been marked by arguments, misunderstandings, and silence. But tonight, there we were, sharing a meal together after far too long. The atmosphere was strange, filled with a sense of both hope and tension. It was the kind of evening I thought would never come. A dinner where we could, perhaps, mend what was broken. Rick, who had once stormed out of my life after I refused to give him money for some ill-fated investment, had reached out unexpectedly. "I miss having you around, Dad," he'd said on the phone, his voice trembling slightly. The words had struck me, a reminder of the son I once knew, full of life and energy. Emma, ever so gracious, had invited me over for pot roast, the dish I used to love when Margaret and I were still a family of 3. The pot roast, she said, would remind me of old times. I couldn't help but be drawn in. It felt like a chance to heal, to go back to simpler days. The years of silence weighed heavily on me, but I was determined to make the most of this moment. Maybe this time, things would be different. Maybe family could really find its way back to each other, just as Margaret had always believed. So I prepared myself. I put on my best suit, the navy one Margaret had bought for me, the one I wore to Rick's graduation. It had seen its share of memories. Now it would accompany me on a new journey, one filled with hope. But little did I know, that night everything I thought I knew about my family was about to change. Before we even sat down to dinner, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was short, to the point, and sent a chill down my spine. "Get up and go now. Don't say anything to your son." I froze. It felt like a gut punch, a warning shot. My hand trembled as I held the phone, the words on the screen lingering longer than they should have. It was like the air in the room had shifted. My instincts, honed over the years, told me something wasn't right. I glanced over at Rick, who was setting the table with Emma. Everything seemed so normal, too normal. The soft clink of silverware on porcelain rang in my ears, mingling with the faint sound of the refrigerator humming in the background. But then my phone buzzed again. Same message. The urgency behind the words struck me. My heart raced. Something told me I wasn't just overreacting. But what was it? What was happening? I felt a knot tighten in my chest as I stared at the message, unsure whether to trust my gut or dismiss it as a prank. But something told me to listen, to leave. The evening that had started with the promise of a long-awaited reconciliation was quickly turning into something unrecognizable, something dangerous. I didn't know what to make of the message, but my instinct screamed that I needed to act. I glanced around the room again, taking in the picture-perfect dinner setting, the soft glow from the chandelier, the gleam of crystal glasses, the freshly ironed napkins folded into perfect little triangles. Everything about it screamed family reunion, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't a simple family dinner. There was something off about the whole thing. The message on my phone felt like a warning. Someone knew something that I didn't. But who? Why? As the minutes ticked by, I tried to focus on the conversation happening around me. Rick and Emma were laughing, asking me about the restaurant business, about how I'd built it from nothing. Their questions were innocent enough, but something in their eyes wasn't. Emma's smile felt too rehearsed. Rick kept refilling my glass, a bit too eagerly. The evening was supposed to be about reconciliation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, studied. "You're looking good, Dad," Rick said, his voice a little too bright. His eyes darted to Emma, as if looking for approval. I nodded, trying to force a smile. "Yeah, you both look well. It's nice to see everything's going well for you." My voice was flat, though. Too much of the past lingered between us, too many unspoken words, too many arguments left unresolved. Rick's smile faltered for a second, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He moved on to talk about his latest real estate ventures, giving me a rundown of some property deals he'd made. He was clearly proud of himself, and I should have been too. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder how much of his success was real, and how much of it was smoke and mirrors. I thought back to the last time we'd spoken, nearly a year ago. He had been desperate for money, for an investment that never panned out. I had refused to help him, and he had stormed out of my life, leaving me with nothing but guilt and frustration. I should have tried harder to understand his side, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his financial troubles were more than just bad luck. And now, sitting here with him, I couldn't help but feel like I was missing something. Emma leaned in, her voice sweet as honey, but there was an edge to it. "How's business, Jonathan? 7 locations now, right? That's impressive." "Just hard work," I replied, trying to keep the conversation neutral. But inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. How did she know so much about my business? How did Rick know about the details of my restaurants? I had never been that open about it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Was this all a coincidence? Or was there something more behind their seemingly perfect lives? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The night was supposed to be about reconnecting with my son, but with every word, every gesture, I felt more and more like I was walking into a trap. I was beginning to see the cracks in the facade. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself I was overthinking things, the phone buzzed again. Another message. This one made my blood run cold. "Stand up and leave. Now, say nothing to your son." I looked at Rick, who was still talking, still unaware of the message I had just received. Emma, too, was lost in conversation, her perfect smile fixed in place. But this time, I didn't feel like I could sit idly by. The words on my phone were clear. I had to leave. But why? What was really going on? The familiar comfort of the meal, the warmth of family, had suddenly turned into something foreign, something I couldn't trust. The dinner table, which had once symbolized family, now felt like a battlefield. There was no reconciliation here, no healing, only manipulation and deception. I stood up abruptly, making an excuse about needing some fresh air. My legs felt shaky, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I walked away from the table, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was being watched. Emma's voice followed me. "Are you feeling all right, Jonathan? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice a little too stiff. "Just need a moment." I made my way toward the hallway, trying to keep my composure. But my mind was racing. What had I walked into? What was happening here? The hallway stretched out before me, and I moved toward what I thought was the bathroom. But then, something stopped me. The back door to the kitchen. It was slightly ajar, and I could see the outline of the garden beyond. My hand hovered over the door handle. The fresh air would clear my head, I told myself. But there was something else, something I couldn't shake. I opened the door slowly, stepping into the cool night air, leaving the sounds of the dinner party behind. The garden was pristine, almost unreal in its perfection, and for the first time that evening, I felt like I could breathe. I stood there for a moment, letting the stillness of the night wash over me. My phone buzzed again. Another message. It was from the same unknown number. "Rick owes $2.3 million to people who break bones when payment is late. You need to leave now." I stared at the message in disbelief. My son, the same person I had tried so hard to reconnect with, was in debt to dangerous people. The weight of the words crashed down on me, and I felt my world tilt. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The night air felt colder now, biting at my skin as I stood there in the garden, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions and revelations. My hands were trembling, the phone still clutched in my grip, its screen flashing with a warning I couldn't ignore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it was hard to think clearly with everything unraveling around me. As I stood there, trying to process the bizarre turn of events, my mind wandered to a time when life was simpler, when things felt certain. Margaret's voice echoed in my head, her calm presence always balancing my storms. Margaret had always been the glue that held everything together, her gentle wisdom, her steady hand guiding me through difficult times. She had an uncanny ability to soothe my anxieties, even when life seemed to be falling apart. I missed her every day. But moments like this, when everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers, made her absence feel even sharper. I closed my eyes for a moment, and there she was, smiling at me from the frame of the family photo on my kitchen counter. I could almost hear her soft laugh, the way she used to scold me for not putting the dishes away properly or leaving my newspapers scattered across the table. Those small, irritating moments were the ones I missed most. The mundane things that had made up our life together. I remembered the time we bought the house together, our first real home. The excitement in her eyes when we picked out the furniture, the thrill of making a place our own. She had this incredible way of making every room feel warm, no matter how small or plain the space was. It wasn't just the house that had been our home. It was the love we put into it. It was the shared laughter, the comfort of her presence beside me at the end of the day. I could almost smell the familiar scent of her perfume, the Chanel No. 5 she wore every Christmas. It still sat on the bathroom counter, untouched since the day she passed. Her presence lingered in every corner of the house, and in moments like these, when I was about to face the painful truth about my family, I clung to her memory like a lifeline. But even in the midst of my grief, I knew I had to stay focused. Rick was in trouble. Real trouble. The message I received, that urgent warning, had shaken me to my core. As much as I wanted to run away from the pain, I knew I couldn't. I couldn't let this continue, let my son spiral further into whatever dark world he had gotten himself into. I had to face whatever lay ahead. I owed it to Margaret's memory, to everything we built, to stop this before it was too late. The door behind me creaked open, pulling me back to the present. I turned, half expecting to see Rick or Emma standing there, their faces masked with feigned concern. But it was Maria, the housekeeper. She stood in the doorway, her face unreadable, her eyes filled with an unspoken knowledge that I hadn't fully understood until now. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice low but steady, "you need to leave. Now." Her words hit me like a punch. I had known something was off, but to hear it from her, someone who had no reason to lie to me, confirmed the worst. She knew. She had to know what was going on behind the scenes. The look in her eyes told me that she wasn't just a passive observer. She knew more than she was letting on. "I'm going to call the police," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. "This ends tonight." Maria didn't answer right away. Instead, she just nodded, her expression softening with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I've been trying to warn you for days," she said quietly. "But I'm afraid it's too late. They've been planning this for a while. Rick, he's gone too far." I didn't have time to process her words. I didn't need to hear any more. My mind was already racing, already formulating a plan. I needed to get out of there, get back to safety before Rick and Emma realized I was onto them. I glanced at my phone again. The same message stared back at me. It was a final warning, a signal that there was no turning back now. My son was in deep, and whatever game he was playing, I was caught in the middle of it. Without saying another word, I turned and walked toward the door. Maria stepped aside, allowing me to pass. But as I reached for the handle, she caught my arm. "Be careful, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll do anything to keep their secret." I didn't need any more warnings. I was already running on instinct, driven by a need to protect myself, to protect what was left of my family. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about more than just my son's betrayal. It was about everything I had built, everything Margaret had believed in, and everything I was about to lose. I stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting my face as I made my way to the front yard. My heart was racing, but I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just walking away. I was walking toward the truth. And the truth, I was learning, was something I couldn't avoid any longer. I had just stepped onto the front porch when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an anonymous message. It was Rick. I hesitated, staring at the screen, the name Rick glaring at me, full of unspoken questions. The feeling that something was wrong still clung to me. But now I was torn. Was this the same son who had distanced himself from me for so long, or was this a different version of him? The one that wanted to reconnect and heal old wounds. Taking a deep breath, I answered the call. "Dad, is everything okay?" Rick's voice sounded concerned, but there was an underlying tone of tension that I hadn't heard before. It wasn't the carefree voice of the son I remembered. It was tighter, as if he was walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing. I steadied myself, keeping my voice calm. "I'm fine. Just needed some air." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "I'm glad you came tonight, Dad. Really. Emma and we want to fix things. We want you to be a part of our lives again. You've been gone too long, and we miss you." It was strange hearing him say that. My son, the one who had been so stubborn, so quick to cut ties when things didn't go his way, was now pleading with me. I wasn't sure if it was genuine or if it was another part of some carefully crafted performance. But it felt real in the moment. Maybe I was just desperate for it to be real. Maybe this was my chance to salvage what was left of our broken relationship. "I miss you too, son," I replied, trying to mask the hesitation in my voice. "I miss us, but there's something I need to know." Rick's voice tightened. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, unsure how to navigate this conversation without giving too much away. "I don't know what's going on, Rick, but something doesn't feel right. I'm not sure I can just ignore the things I've seen and heard tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line, so long that I began to wonder if he had hung up. But then his voice returned, shakier now, tinged with something I couldn't place. "Dad, it's not what you think. I swear to you, His voice cracked slightly. "I just want things to be normal again, to make it right. Emma and I are doing well, but we need your help, please." There it was again. Another plea. The son I had raised, the one I had hoped would grow into a man of integrity, was still somewhere in there. But what had happened to him? How had he gotten involved with these people? I thought back to the conversation we had a year ago, when he had asked for money. Money he had promised would go toward some business venture. A venture that turned out to be a risky gamble, one that led to his financial troubles. I had refused to help him then, but now I was beginning to wonder if the truth was far darker than I had imagined. The real estate deals he had spoken about tonight, the sudden wealth, the perfect house. How much of it was real? I couldn't ignore the warning from Maria, the housekeeper. I couldn't ignore the anonymous message. Something wasn't adding up, and I was starting to suspect that whatever Rick was hiding, Emma was in on it too. "Rick, listen to me carefully," I said, my voice firm now, shedding the doubt that had plagued me just moments before. "I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to be part of it. Whatever you're mixed up in, I'm not going to turn a blind eye. You're going to have to answer for this." There was a long silence on the other end, a silence so thick with tension I could almost hear him processing the words. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice low and tight. "Dad, please. You don't know what they'll do if I don't pay. I didn't have a choice." The desperation in his voice was palpable, like a man backed into a corner. For a brief moment, I felt pity for him, but that pity quickly turned into something else, something far darker. "What do you mean?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Who are they, Rick?" The silence dragged on for a moment before Rick's voice broke again, barely above a whisper. "I owe $2 million to people who don't care about family, who don't care about anything but getting their money. They don't play by the rules, Dad. If I don't pay them, they'll come after me. They'll come after Emma. And you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Rick, my son, was in debt to dangerous people. People who didn't care about family ties, who would do anything to collect. It explained everything: the sudden wealth, the luxurious house, the desperation in his voice. It all made sense now. He had been using me, using my goodwill to cover his tracks. But why hadn't he just told me? Why had he dragged me into this web of lies and manipulation? The answer was simple. He was too far gone. And now he was hoping I would fix things for him. Once again, "I don't want your money, Rick. I don't want anything to do with this," I said, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. "You've made your choices, and you'll have to live with them. Dad, please." His voice cracked once more, desperate. "I never wanted it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." The words felt hollow. How could he expect me to believe him now, after everything that had happened? "You don't get to use me as your safety net anymore, Rick," I said, my voice cold and final. "I'm done." I ended the call before he could say anything else. It felt final. The decision I had been avoiding for so long, accepting that my son was lost, had been made. I had no more excuses for him. As I stood there in the garden, the weight of everything that had just happened began to sink in. My son had betrayed me, and I had no choice but to protect myself now. But the guilt of walking away from him, of severing ties with the person I had once believed in so completely, sat heavy on my chest. I had to leave. There was no other option now. The truth was clear, and it was time for me to face it. I stood motionless for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand, Rick's voice still echoing in my mind. The weight of the words, $2 million, felt like a physical presence, pressing down on me. The idea that my son was involved with people who would harm him, or worse, harm others, was almost too much to comprehend. I had spent years trying to raise him right, teaching him the values of hard work and integrity. But now, it seemed, all of that had been for nothing. This wasn't the son I had raised. This wasn't the man I had hoped he would become. As I made my way back into the house, I felt like I was walking through a dream. The luxurious furnishings, the pristine decor, none of it seemed real anymore. It was a facade, carefully crafted to hide the desperation and deception lurking beneath. I could hear the soft clinking of glasses from the dining room, the faint hum of conversation, but it all felt distant. The reality of what Rick had become was overwhelming, and I couldn't pretend like everything was normal anymore. I knew I had to get out. I had to leave before things escalated further, before Rick or Emma realized I was onto them, before whatever dangerous plans they had in motion came to a head. I stepped into the kitchen, where Maria was still silently washing dishes, her back to me. Her movements were mechanical, almost as if she had done this thousands of times before. But there was something different about her tonight. She wasn't just doing her job. She was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a decision. "Maria," I said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting mine, her expression unreadable. "I need to leave, now." She didn't ask questions. She simply nodded, as if she had been expecting this. "I'll make sure the door's clear," she whispered. "You should go before they notice." I didn't ask what she meant by they. I didn't need to know. I just needed to get away from this house and from the people who had tried to manipulate me into becoming a pawn in their twisted game. Maria guided me to the back door, her hand lingering on the handle as she opened it for me. She didn't say anything else, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. She had seen enough. She had known enough for a long time. I had no doubt that she had been silently watching, perhaps even waiting for someone to notice the truth. As I stepped outside into the cool night air again, I could feel the weight of everything I had just learned settling in. My legs felt heavy, each step taking me farther away from the life I had known, from the family I thought I had. It was almost too much to bear. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the only number I could trust at this point. The police. I needed help. I needed someone to handle this before things went from bad to worse. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked, her voice calm but firm. I need to report a crime, I said, my voice steady but my mind racing. My son and his wife have been involved in an illegal scheme. I think they're trying to steal from me, and they've been working with dangerous people. I need officers at 247 Elmwood Drive, Montclair, New Jersey. Now. I gave the dispatcher all the details I could remember, from the threatening messages to the suspicious behavior at dinner, but there was so much I didn't know, so much I couldn't piece together yet. I had no idea how deep Rick had gotten into this, or how far Emma was willing to go to protect him. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. Officers are on their way, Mr. Miller, the operator assured me. We'll have someone there as soon as possible. Please stay clear of the property. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thank you, I said quietly before hanging up. I felt sick to my stomach, the adrenaline surging through me like a flood. I was shaking, and I couldn't stop it. This was it. There was no going back now. Everything I had built, everything I had worked for, was on the line, and I had no idea what I was walking into. Maria was standing at the door, waiting for me. Her face was unreadable, but I could see a flicker of something. Concern, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. She had known. She had been waiting for me to see the truth. "You're doing the right thing, Mr. Miller," she said softly. "Get out of here. It's not safe for you anymore." I didn't know what she meant by that, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had to go. I had to move quickly. The night felt darker now, the streets of Montclair suddenly unfamiliar, almost threatening. I walked briskly, not looking back at the mansion behind me, not wanting to give Rick or Emma the chance to stop me. I didn't know what they would do if they found out I was leaving, but I wasn't willing to find out. I reached the end of the street and flagged down an Uber. The driver was polite, but I could see the unease in his eyes as I climbed into the back seat. I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. As we pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the house, my heart heavy with the realization that my family had been consumed by greed, by desperation. I didn't know if I could ever repair the damage done, but I couldn't allow myself to be another victim. Not anymore. The Uber ride felt like an eternity. As the car merged onto the highway, leaving Montclair behind, I stared out the window, trying to gather my thoughts. The sleek houses and manicured lawns of the affluent neighborhood blurred by in the night, their pristine exteriors hiding the rot within. My son, my flesh and blood, had become someone I barely recognized. Someone desperate enough to risk everything, to sacrifice the very family he was supposed to protect, just to survive a self-inflicted mess of his own making. How did we get here? How had Rick gone from a bright, ambitious kid to someone so entangled in a criminal world that he was willing to poison his own father? The weight of the evening's revelations settled heavily on my chest, a suffocating burden. My son was in debt, $2 million in the hole, owed to dangerous people who didn't play by the rules. He was desperate, and it had been clear from the moment I stepped into their house that the night was no longer just about dinner and reconciliation. No, it was about Rick's last-ditch effort to get me to sign away everything Margaret and I had worked for. He had tried to use me, to manipulate me into fixing his mess. The house he had chosen to live in was nothing short of a mansion, the kind of home that seemed to mock everything I stood for: the marble floors, the grand staircase, the expensive paintings. None of it felt real. It felt like a stage set, the kind of extravagant illusion people like Rick and Emma use to hide their true intentions. It wasn't about family, about love, or about shared history. It was about appearances. It was about power, control, and deception. I ran my hand through my hair, my thoughts spiraling. I had been blind. I had been foolish to believe that somehow we could just pick up where we left off, that maybe, just maybe, time could heal all wounds. But as the night went on, the truth became undeniable. Rick wasn't the person I thought he was. He wasn't the son I raised, the son who had once called me for advice, for support. He had become someone else, someone lost in his own ambition and desperation. I glanced at my phone again. The screen still displayed the messages from the unknown number, the one that had warned me to leave. That same message, over and over again. Get up and go now. Don't say anything to your son. I had listened. I had walked away. And now I was faced with the reality of what had been happening behind closed doors. Rick's world was built on lies. His wealth, the mansion, the life he and Emma had created, it was all a facade. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. How many lies had been woven into this web? How much of what Rick had told me had been true, and how much of it was carefully constructed to keep me in the dark? The Uber driver's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Sir, you're almost there." I nodded, my eyes still fixed on the passing streetlights. We were getting closer to Brooklyn, back to the neighborhood where everything had started. The place where I had built my life, my business, my family. The familiar streets of Brooklyn stretched out ahead of me, and with each passing block, a sense of relief began to wash over me. The tension in my chest loosened slightly, but the gnawing feeling that something was still horribly wrong didn't leave me. I had been a part of this community for years. I had worked hard, built my restaurants, and done everything in my power to provide for my family. But now, I was faced with the harsh truth. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival. My survival. I didn't know how this was going to end, or how much further Rick and Emma were willing to go to get what they wanted. But I did know one thing for sure. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let my son destroy everything Margaret and I had built, everything we had fought for. As the car turned onto my street, I gave the driver directions to my home. He pulled into the driveway, and I sat there for a moment, just taking in the sight of my modest house. It was nothing like the mansion in Montclair. It wasn't even close, but it was home, and it was all I had left. I paid the driver and stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting my face. The familiar sound of the city surrounded me. Distant car horns, the low hum of conversation from nearby buildings. For the first time tonight, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I stood there, staring at the house, I knew that things had changed. My son had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and whatever happened next, I couldn't protect him anymore. The trust we had once shared was gone, shattered by his actions, by the choices he had made. And I was left here, with nothing but the wreckage of what used to be my family. I walked up to the front door, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the handle. But before I could open it, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from the same unknown number. "Rick is planning something else. Don't trust him. Stay alert." I read the message twice, the meaning sinking in slowly. My instincts had been right all along. Rick hadn't given up, and whatever game he was playing, it was far from over. I opened the door, my heart heavy with the knowledge that the battle was just beginning. There was no turning back now. Whatever Rick had planned, I would have to face it head on, and I wasn't going to let him win. The night had taken a turn for the worse, and I was no longer sure what to believe. Every moment with Rick and Emma had felt like a performance. Perfect smiles, well-rehearsed lines. But behind those smiles, something was off. Something I couldn't place until now. I stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter, the phone still heavy in my hand. The Uber had dropped me off at home, and I'd barely had a chance to settle in when the phone's vibrating screen caught my attention again. The message was from the same number as before. Don't trust them. They're planning something worse. Don't go back. The words rattled me. At this point, I wasn't sure if I was paranoid or if something darker was really at play. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. My son, the boy I had raised, had become someone I didn't recognize. He was tangled in a world of deceit, of greed. And it seemed like the deeper I dug, the worse it became. I glanced at the family photo on the refrigerator, the one of Rick, Emma, and me from the wedding years ago. We had looked so happy then. I could almost feel the warmth of that day, the hope, the promise of better days. But now, it was nothing more than a distant memory. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was being watched, that somehow they knew I was onto them. Rick's phone call had sounded desperate, but it also sounded like he was playing a game, trying to manipulate me into feeling guilty, into believing he was the same person I had once known. And Emma, with her calculated charm and subtle smiles, had played her part so well. But I had seen through it. I couldn't help but replay the dinner in my mind, every moment, every glance exchanged between Rick and Emma. I had caught the way they looked at each other when I started asking about their wealth, about their success. It was too rehearsed. Rick's quick answers, Emma's deflection when I asked about how they could afford such a home, the sudden change in their tone when I mentioned my business. All of it seemed too perfect, too planned. And then there was the whiskey. The way they refilled my glass without me asking. The way Rick's smile lingered a little too long when he saw how much I had drunk. The strange dizziness I had felt after just a couple of sips. Was it the alcohol? Or was it something more? I thought back to the earlier conversation. They had been so focused on my retirement plans, on the future of my business. They had been prodding, asking me specific questions about my will, about succession planning, things I never would have shared unless I trusted them. But now, I knew better. They weren't just asking for casual conversation. They were fishing. They wanted to know what I had, what I could give them. My hand trembled as I set the phone down on the counter. The idea that my son could betray me, could betray his own family for money, seemed unfathomable. I had raised him to know better, to understand that loyalty, integrity, and trust were the foundation of family. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that. Somewhere along the way, he had traded those values for the lure of easy money, the thrill of high-stakes gambling, and the false promise of quick success. And now, here I was, alone in my kitchen, with a bitter reality setting in. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Rick had crossed a line, and the consequences were too great to ignore. I needed answers. I needed to know just how deep this went. I couldn't keep living in the dark, waiting for the next shoe to drop. It was time to confront my son and find out what he was really involved in. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door and stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a shock to the system, snapping me out of the daze I had been in. I had to go back to Montclair. I had to confront Rick and Emma before they made their next move. As I pulled up the address in my phone, the familiar streets of Brooklyn fading behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much bigger than I had imagined. The world I had once known, the one where family was everything, was crumbling before my eyes. But I wasn't going to let it end like this. Not without a fight. The drive to Montclair felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Every mile, every block, felt like I was inching closer to a confrontation I wasn't ready for. I could feel the weight of the night's events pressing down on me, each thought unraveling a thread I wished I hadn't pulled. But it was too late to turn back now. The message from the unknown number kept replaying in my head. Rick owes $2.3 million to people who break bones when payment is late. The words stung like a slap across the face. My son, in debt to people who didn't care about family, who would destroy him, destroy us if he couldn't pay. It was a hard truth to swallow, but there it was, staring me in the face. I couldn't understand it. How had my son become this? The boy I had raised, the one I had always been so proud of, now seemed like a stranger to me. It was as if I was watching him from the outside, helplessly witnessing the unraveling of a life I had once believed in. The house in Montclair stood in front of me like a fortress, the kind of place you see in magazines, where everything is pristine, polished, perfect. But behind the polished exterior, I knew there was rot. I had been inside, seen the way Rick and Emma moved, the way they avoided certain topics, their words sharp and rehearsed. It was all part of an act, and I had been foolish enough to believe it. I pulled into the driveway slowly, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The house loomed over me, its marble pillars gleaming in the moonlight. It looked like something out of a dream, but it felt like a nightmare now. The false security, the lies they had woven into every corner of their lives, was too much for me to bear. I got out of the car and walked up the path toward the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. The doorbell chimed as I rang it, its sound echoing through the empty house. It was quiet. Too quiet. I hadn't expected Rick or Emma to greet me with open arms, but I hadn't expected this level of tension. The door opened, and there stood Maria, the housekeeper. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment I saw something flicker in them. Concern, fear, maybe even a touch of regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice soft but strained. "I didn't expect you to come back." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I need to talk to Rick. Where is he? Maria hesitated, glancing back into the house. He's in the study, but you should be careful. He's been on edge tonight. He's not the same as he used to be. I nodded, the words weighing heavily on me. I could feel the unease in her voice, the quiet warning that something was off. But I didn't have time to analyze it. I had to face Rick. "Thank you, Maria," I said, stepping past her into the house. The grand foyer seemed even more imposing now, the marble floors reflecting the harsh light of the chandelier above. I felt out of place here, a stranger in a home that had once represented everything I had hoped for. I made my way down the hall to the study, my footsteps echoing through the silence. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices from inside. Rick's voice, low and urgent, and Emma's equally tense. I pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the hinges loud in the stillness. Rick looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Dad, what are you doing here?" His voice was forced, like he was trying to hide something, but the tension in the room was palpable. "I need to talk to you, Rick," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I know what's been going on. I know about the money. I know about the people you're involved with." Rick's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Emma's hand instinctively moved to his, squeezing it in a way that felt practiced. Their behavior was too smooth, too rehearsed. "You're not going to get away with this," I continued, stepping closer. "I know what you've been doing, Rick, and I'm done being part of it." The room grew colder, the air thick with unspoken words. Emma stood up suddenly, her posture rigid, her smile tight. "Jonathan, you don't understand. This is bigger than you think. Rick has done what he had to do. We both have. We were just trying to protect ourselves." I stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. "Protect yourselves? By poisoning me? By trying to get me to sign away everything I've built?" My voice cracked with anger, the betrayal hitting me harder than I had anticipated. "You're not protecting anyone. You're just digging a deeper hole for yourselves." Rick stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he ran them through his hair. "Dad, please. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want any of it. But you don't understand. The money, the debt. I had no choice." I could see the desperation in his eyes now, the fear. For the first time tonight, I realized that he wasn't just playing a part. He was trapped. And Emma, the woman who had stood by his side, had been part of it all along. "Rick, you made your choices," I said, my voice calm despite the fury that burned inside me. "And now you're going to face the consequences." Rick's face twisted with anguish, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He knew I wasn't going to back down. This was it. I turned to leave, but something inside me stopped me. I couldn't just walk away without getting the full truth, without understanding exactly what they had planned for me and for this family. I turned back to face them one last time. If you don't tell me everything, if you don't come clean, I will go to the police. I'm done protecting you, Rick. This is your mess, and it's time for you to clean it up." Rick's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the son I used to know. The boy who had once looked up to me. The boy who had trusted me. But it was too late for trust now. As I left the study, I could feel the weight of the decision hanging over me. Whatever happened next, I knew I couldn't go back. The world I had known, my family, my son, was gone, and I was walking away from it. I made my way back down the hallway, my heart pounding as the weight of what I had just said settled over me. The confrontation with Rick and Emma had shaken me more than I cared to admit, but there was no turning back now. I had made my choice. I was no longer going to be complicit in their lies. As I approached the front door, Maria appeared again, her expression tense. She didn't speak immediately, but I could see the worry etched on her face. She had been caught in the middle of this, too, and I could sense her unease. "Mr. Miller," she said quietly, her voice laced with concern. "You need to leave. It's not safe for you here. They'll find a way to make you stay." I stopped in my tracks, turning to face her. "What do you mean?" My voice was low, careful, as if speaking too loudly might set off a chain of events I couldn't control. Maria glanced nervously over her shoulder, as though afraid someone might overhear. Then she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The whiskey," she said. They put something in it. They've been planning this for days, maybe longer. They wanted you to sign those papers, to make you do it willingly. But the drink, it was meant to make you more suggestible, easier to manipulate. My stomach turned, nausea rising in my chest. The sudden dizziness I had felt earlier, the way everything had seemed slightly off, it all made sense now. I had been drugged, made vulnerable by something I had trusted. "They poisoned me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Maria nodded. "It's called Zetrulum. It's a powerful drug. When mixed with alcohol, it makes you more compliant. They wanted to get you to sign away everything without realizing what you were doing." I stood frozen, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. Rick and Emma had planned everything, down to the smallest detail. The dinner, the conversation, the constant refilling of my glass. It had all been calculated to get me to sign those papers, to trap me in a web of their making. Maria's eyes flicked toward the study, where I knew Rick and Emma were waiting. "You have to go now, Mr. Miller. They won't stop. They'll try again, and next time, it could be worse." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I had walked into a trap, but now that I knew the truth, I couldn't just leave. I had to stop them. I couldn't let them win. "I'm not going anywhere until this is over," I said, my voice hardening with resolve. "I'm going to make sure they don't hurt anyone else." Maria stepped back, giving me a small, reluctant nod. "Be careful," she said softly. "They'll do anything to protect themselves. They'll lie, manipulate, even hurt those they care about. I took a deep breath, nodding once, before I turned and walked toward the study again. I wasn't going to let them escape. Not this time. As I entered the room, Rick and Emma both looked up, their faces masked with false concern. Rick's usual charm was gone, replaced by something far more desperate. Emma, ever the perfect hostess, smiled too brightly, her eyes calculating. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Rick's voice was tight, his words strained. He was trying to appear casual, but I could see the panic in his eyes. They knew I was onto them now. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I'm not walking away from this without getting the truth." Rick's face paled, and I saw his hand twitch nervously. He was on the edge of losing control, and I wasn't going to give him the chance to regain it. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore, Rick," I continued. "You don't get to hide behind your lies, your wealth, and your schemes. I know what you've been doing, and I'm done pretending like it's not happening." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "No more excuses, no more games. I know about the debt, I know about the people you owe money to, and I know about the poison you put in my drink." Rick's face went blank for a moment, and I saw his fingers grip the edge of the desk in an attempt to steady himself. Emma's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't what you think, Dad," Rick said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." I shook my head, disgust welling up inside me. "You didn't want to hurt me, but you were willing to poison me, to steal everything from me, to ruin your own family." Emma stood up, her expression shifting from calculated warmth to something darker. "You don't understand, Jonathan. We did what we had to do. We were just trying to survive. You don't know what it's like to be in our position, to be desperate." I stepped forward, my anger rising. "Desperate? You don't get to play the victim here, Emma. You knew exactly what you were doing. Both of you did. And I'm done pretending like it's okay." Rick looked like he was about to say something, but before he could open his mouth, I held up a hand to silence him. "I'm not going to let you destroy everything Margaret and I built together. I won't let you tear this family apart just to feed your greed." Rick's shoulders slumped, and I could see the fight leave him. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the son I had once known, the one who had been so full of potential, so full of hope. But it was too late for that now. "You made your choices, Rick," I said softly, my voice betraying the sorrow I felt. "And now, you're going to have to live with them." I turned and walked toward the door, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had just learned. The betrayal, the lies. It was all too much to bear. But I couldn't turn away from the truth. I had to face it, even if it meant losing everything. As I walked out of the study, my mind was swirling. I had confronted Rick and Emma with everything I knew, everything I suspected, but their reactions told me there was more to this story, things I hadn't uncovered yet. I knew my confrontation had shaken them, but I also knew that they were desperate enough to keep trying. Their smiles were forced, their words laced with false concern. But their eyes, those eyes, told a different story. I could hear the distant sound of Maria moving around in the kitchen, her footsteps quick but measured, like she was trying to remain unnoticed. I had a sudden urge to speak with her again. She had seen more than she let on. The look in her eyes when I had first arrived tonight, there had been something there. Something that suggested she knew what was happening before I did. I walked toward the kitchen, the familiar sounds of a home that had once been full of life. Now a place that felt foreign to me. The clink of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator. It all felt so distant now, as though I was living in someone else's story. Maria was standing at the counter, her back to me as she busied herself with cleaning. She didn't turn around when I entered, but I could see the way her shoulders tensed, as if expecting my approach. She continued wiping down the counters, her movements slow and deliberate. I took a deep breath, then spoke. "Maria, I need to ask you something." She paused for a moment, then set the dish towel down, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were tired, but there was a certain wisdom there, a knowing that spoke volumes without a word. "Mr. Miller," she began quietly, "I never wanted to be involved in this, but I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt you." I felt a chill run through me. "You knew? From the beginning?" Maria nodded, her expression softening with regret. "I knew something was wrong. I saw how they were acting, how they were constantly looking for ways to manipulate you, to get what they wanted. When I first started working here, I thought it was just about the house, the money. But then I saw the real truth. They've been planning this for a long time." I stared at her, trying to process her words. This wasn't just about a toxic family dynamic or a son who had lost his way. It was about something far darker. "What exactly did they want from me, Maria?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Rick owes a lot of money. He's been caught up in a web of debts, gambling, high-stakes poker, the kind of people who don't let you walk away. Emma's been helping him cover it up. The house, the lifestyle, it's all a front. They needed you to sign those papers, Jonathan. They needed you to give them control of your businesses so they could use it as collateral. They would have had everything, your businesses, your wealth, and with that they could have gotten out from under the debts. They were hoping you would just sign, without thinking." I felt the blood drain from my face. They had been using me all along. It wasn't just about the inheritance or fixing things. It was about power, control, and escaping their own destructive choices. My stomach churned as the truth became more and more clear. They weren't just trying to fix things with me. They were trying to rob me blind. And in the process, they had been willing to risk everything. My life, my business, and my trust. "You've been part of this all along," I said quietly. "But why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you stop them?" Maria's face tightened, the guilt evident. "I couldn't, Mr. Miller. I'm just the housekeeper. They've made it clear from the start that my place is to stay out of it. But I couldn't watch you fall for it. I've seen too many people destroyed by greed. By the time I realized what was really happening, it was too late to stop them." I shook my head, unable to fully process her words. My mind kept replaying the events of the evening, trying to make sense of it all. The poisoned whiskey, the false smiles, the questions about my business and my retirement plans. It had all been part of a carefully orchestrated plan, designed to manipulate me into submission. I thought of Margaret then. She had always been the glue that held everything together. She had been the one who kept our family grounded, who believed that love and trust were enough to overcome anything. She would have known what to do in this situation. She would have seen through the facade long before I did. But now, here I was, standing in the aftermath of my family's betrayal, unsure of where to go from here. "I have to stop them," I said, the words more to myself than to Maria. "I can't let them get away with this." Maria nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Be careful, Mr. Miller. They're dangerous. They'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. You can't let them drag you down with them." I stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, trying to gather my thoughts. Maria had warned me, but I already knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let Rick and Emma get away with destroying everything Margaret and I had built. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me without a fight. I walked back toward the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. It was time to face Rick and Emma. One last time to make sure they understood that this was over. I wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I looked up at the sky, the stars faintly visible through the haze of city lights. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the sounds of the city that never truly slept. But in that moment, everything felt still, silent. The weight of everything I had learned tonight, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, was almost too much to bear. But I knew I had to go back. I had to confront my son and put an end to this. As I stepped out onto the front porch, the cold night air hit me sharply, clearing the fog in my mind. I paused for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to steady myself. My thoughts were still spinning, but one thing was becoming crystal clear. I had to leave, and I had to leave now. I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by Rick, Emma, and their lies any longer. It wasn't safe, not physically, but emotionally. The toxic atmosphere of their manipulation and betrayal was suffocating, and I could feel it slowly chipping away at my resolve. I wasn't going to be their pawn anymore. I wasn't going to be the one they used to escape from their mess. It was time for me to take control again. Time to stop pretending like this was just a temporary lapse in judgment. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling slightly as I dialed the only number I could trust. The only number that might be able to help me stop this before it went too far. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered, her voice calm but alert. I need police at 247 Elmwood Drive, Montclair, New Jersey, I said, my voice steady despite the panic I could feel rising inside me. My son and his wife are involved in a scheme to defraud me, and I believe they're trying to poison me. I have evidence, but they're dangerous people. The operator took down the details, asking the usual questions about location and the nature of the threat. As I spoke, I kept my eyes fixed on the mansion in front of me, knowing that I couldn't go back inside. Not now. Not without risking everything. The officers will be on their way shortly, Mr. Miller, the operator said, her tone professional. Please stay in a safe location and do not return to the property. I won't, I replied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Thank you. I hung up and stuffed the phone into my pocket, my eyes narrowing as I surveyed the mansion one last time. I couldn't just leave it to chance. I had to make sure Rick and Emma didn't have a chance to clean up their mess, to destroy the evidence before the police arrived. Without thinking too much, I turned and began walking toward the back of the property, my footsteps quick and quiet. The garden that had looked so perfect when I first arrived now felt like a trap, its manicured hedges and pristine pathways a stark contrast to the chaos brewing within the house. As I reached the garden gate, I paused and glanced back at the house one last time. I didn't know what I would find when I returned, but I knew I couldn't let them get away with it. I stepped out onto the quiet street, the cool night air enveloping me, and called an Uber. My mind raced with thoughts of what I would do once I was safe. I had to move quickly. I had to protect what was mine. But more than that, I had to confront the truth. I needed to know why my son, someone I had loved and raised, had gone down this path. Why had he chosen to deceive and betray me for money? I climbed into the car when it arrived, my heart still pounding, and told the driver to take me to the nearest police station. I wasn't going back to that house. I wasn't going to give Rick or Emma the chance to manipulate me again. As the car pulled away from Elmwood Drive, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It felt like a weight was being lifted off my chest, but at the same time, the heaviness of everything I had just discovered lingered in the air. I thought of Margaret, of how she would have handled this. She would have known exactly what to say, what to do. But she wasn't here, and I had to face this alone. I needed to protect myself and everything I had worked for. I needed to make sure that Rick and Emma wouldn't be able to pull the wool over anyone's eyes again. They had tried to use me, to manipulate me into signing over my life's work, and I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let them destroy everything Margaret and I had built together. The car sped through the streets of Montclair, leaving the mansion behind, but the feeling of dread still lingered. I glanced out the window, watching the city blur by in the darkness. I wasn't sure how this would end, but one thing was for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. As the police station came into view, I knew this was only the beginning. I had to take action before Rick and Emma could escape the consequences of their actions. I had to make sure that justice was served. I paid the driver when we arrived and walked inside, my mind focused, my body tense with anticipation. The station was bustling, officers moving in and out, but I didn't care about the noise. I didn't care about anything except making sure I got the truth out there, making sure Rick and Emma couldn't hurt anyone else. I approached the desk, my hands still shaking, but my voice strong as I spoke to the officer behind the counter. "I need to report a crime," I said, my words calm but firm. "My son and his wife have been conspiring to steal from me. I believe they've been poisoning me, and I have evidence that they were planning to steal my businesses." The officer nodded, taking down my details, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He had no idea what I had just walked away from, what I had discovered. I wasn't sure what kind of response I was expecting, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them walk away from this. "You'll need to give a full statement, sir," the officer said, motioning for me to sit. "We'll have someone talk to you soon." I sat down in the waiting area, my mind still racing. I was tired, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the last few hours. But I couldn't rest. Not yet. Not until Rick and Emma were held accountable for their actions. As I waited, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Maria. "They know you're gone. Be careful. They're coming for you." My stomach dropped. Rick and Emma weren't done yet. I clenched my fists, the resolve hardening in my chest. I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. The waiting room in the police station was sterile, filled with flickering fluorescent lights and the low hum of distant conversations. I sat on the edge of a plastic chair, hands clenched in my lap, my mind spinning with the gravity of what was happening. Everything felt out of control. My son, my business, my family. Everything I had spent my life building was slipping through my fingers, and the weight of that loss hung heavy on my chest. I had told the officer everything about the threats, the poison, the manipulation. I had given him all the information I could, but now all I could do was wait. The silence around me was deafening, broken only by the occasional shuffle of paperwork or the low murmur of voices at the front desk. But my thoughts kept returning to Rick, to Emma, to the house in Montclair. I thought of the whiskey they had given me, the dizziness I had felt, the subtle way they had tried to steer me toward signing those documents. It had been so carefully orchestrated, so meticulously planned. I hadn't even seen it coming. And then there was Maria. I hadn't fully understood her role in all of this, why she had stayed silent, why she had watched as Rick and Emma used her to further their plans. But now, as I sat in that room, I began to wonder if she had known all along. Had she been just another pawn in their game, or had she been trying to protect me? The message she sent me: "They know you're gone. Be careful. They're coming for you," only deepened my suspicions. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at the screen, the weight of Maria's words sinking in. I needed to know what was happening, but I didn't know where to turn. I couldn't rely on the police alone to protect me. Rick and Emma were clever, manipulative, and resourceful. If they were really coming for me, I had to be ready. I looked at the message again, then glanced around the room. I needed to act fast. I couldn't let them catch me off guard. My thoughts raced as I formulated a plan in my head. I had already given the police all the information I could, but now I needed to take the next step. I needed to protect what was mine, but more importantly, I needed to make sure that Rick and Emma didn't get away with this. Just as I was about to respond to Maria's message, the door to the back office opened, and a tall, uniformed officer stepped into the room. His eyes scanned the area before landing on me. "Mr. Miller?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. I stood up, my heart pounding. "Yes, that's me. We've got a few more questions for you," the officer said, gesturing toward the back office. "Please, follow me." I followed him down a narrow hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My mind was still spinning, but I knew I had to stay focused. I couldn't afford to let my emotions get the best of me. Rick and Emma were dangerous, and I wasn't sure how far they were willing to go to keep their secrets. The officer opened the door to the office and motioned for me to sit at the small desk inside. The room smelled of coffee and paper, the walls lined with stacks of files and a few old case boards. It was nothing like the fancy offices I was used to in my business, but it had the familiar scent of authority. Something I hadn't realized I missed until now. I sat down, my hands still trembling slightly as I folded them on the desk. The officer sat across from me, a notepad in hand. "We've reviewed your statement, Mr. Miller," the officer began. "But we need more details. You mentioned something about your son owing money, a large sum of money, to people who are dangerous. Can you tell me exactly how you found out about this?" I took a deep breath, my mind flicking back to the phone call with Rick, to the moment when everything started to fall apart. I didn't know the full extent until tonight, but I received a message from an anonymous source. They warned me about the debt Rick had gotten into. They told me that Rick owed over $2 million to people involved in high-stakes gambling, and that if he didn't pay, these people would resort to extreme measures. I didn't believe it at first, but now it all makes sense. The officer nodded, taking notes. "Do you know the identity of this anonymous source?" I hesitated. "No. They've been sending me messages, warning me about Rick and Emma, about what they were planning. They told me about the poisoned whiskey, about the legal documents they wanted me to sign. But I don't know who they are. I didn't even know if I should believe them at first." The officer looked up from his notepad, his eyes sharp. "And how did they know about the whiskey? About your son's debts?" I didn't have an answer for that. I couldn't explain how the anonymous tipster had known those details. I couldn't even explain how they knew about the specific drink Rick had given me, how the alcohol had been spiked. But I knew one thing. This person, whoever they were, had been watching. "They knew everything," I said quietly. "Everything that had been happening in that house." The officer scribbled something down and then paused, looking at me with a new intensity. "What do you think they want, Mr. Miller? Why would they warn you?" I sat back in my chair, taking a moment to think. The question lingered in my mind, but the answer felt too obvious to say aloud. The anonymous source was trying to help me. They were trying to prevent me from falling into Rick and Emma's trap, to warn me before it was too late. "I don't know," I finally said. "But whoever they are, they knew exactly what was going on." The officer leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "We'll get a team on this. We'll look into your son's debts, the people involved, and we'll start tracking down this anonymous tipster. But I need to know, Mr. Miller, do you want to press charges against your son?" The question hit me like a slap. It was one thing to suspect that Rick had betrayed me, but it was another thing entirely to face the reality of what I was about to do. To charge my own son, the person I had raised and loved, with a crime that could destroy his life. "I don't know," I said quietly, my voice wavering. "I don't know what I should do." The officer nodded understandingly. "We'll give you time. But if this goes to trial, if we gather enough evidence, you'll need to decide." I left the station soon after, my mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. I had never imagined that it would come to this, that my family would fracture in this way. And yet, as I stood outside in the quiet street, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Rick and Emma get away with what they had done. I had to find out who was behind the messages, who was watching me, and what they wanted. I couldn't let this spiral out of control. Not now. But as I got into the Uber and headed home, one question echoed in my mind. If Rick was capable of doing all this, what else was he willing to do to protect his secrets? The Uber ride back to my house felt like an eternity. My mind was still racing with everything I had just learned. The anonymous tipster had shaken me to my core, but the weight of Rick's betrayal was still fresh. Each word he had said, each action that now felt so carefully calculated, replayed in my mind like a broken record. Emma's forced smiles, Rick's desperate pleas. It had all been a performance, a mask to cover up their deceit. I knew I couldn't avoid this confrontation much longer. I couldn't live in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder, unsure of what they would do next. I had to face Rick and Emma head-on, make them realize that I wasn't going to back down. They had tried to manipulate me, poison me, and steal everything I had worked for. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had already lost so much, but I wasn't going to lose my dignity, my self-respect, or my life's work. As the car pulled into the driveway, I felt the familiar weight of my decision settle in. The house loomed in front of me, the same house that had once symbolized family, warmth, and togetherness. Now it felt like a prison. The thought of walking back inside made my stomach churn. I wasn't just walking into a house, I was walking into a battleground, a place where everything I once believed in was being dismantled piece by piece. But I had made up my mind. I was going back to confront Rick, to demand answers. I wasn't going to let this situation spiral out of control. I had already seen what they were capable of, and I wasn't going to be a passive participant in their games anymore. I stepped out of the car, my movements slow and deliberate. As I made my way to the front door, the cool air seemed to heighten my awareness, sharpening my senses. Everything felt more intense now. Every sound, every movement, every detail felt amplified. The doorbell rang out through the silence of the night, a sharp reminder that this was it. There was no turning back now. The door opened slowly, and there stood Rick, his face pale, his eyes flicking nervously as he saw me standing there. He had clearly expected me to leave, to disappear into the night. But I wasn't going anywhere. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Rick's voice faltered, and I saw the tension in his posture. He was nervous, afraid. The bravado that had been so evident earlier was gone now, replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "I need answers, Rick," I said, my voice low and firm. "You've lied to me. You've tried to manipulate me into signing over everything I've built, and I'm not going to stand by and let it happen." Rick's face shifted from confusion to something darker, his eyes flickering with a mix of fear and anger. He stepped back, his hand hovering near the door frame as if debating whether to let me in. "You don't understand, Dad," he said, his voice desperate. "I never wanted any of this. I was just trying to fix things, to get out of the mess I've made." His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the son I used to know, the one who had looked up to me with admiration. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculated expression, the same one I had seen in him during dinner. He was trying to play me again, and I wasn't having it. "No more lies, Rick," I said, stepping into the house. "No more excuses. I know about the debts, about the people you've been working with. I know about the poison, and I know about Emma's involvement." Rick's face turned ashen, and his hand dropped to his side. He looked like a man who had just realized that his world was crumbling around him. "Tad, please," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. But you don't understand how deep I'm in. They're going to kill me, Dad, if I don't pay them. They'll come after me, after Emma." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. I could see the fear in his eyes now, the raw terror that had been buried under his bravado. But I also saw something else, something far more troubling. He wasn't just afraid, he was broken. And in his desperation, he had dragged his wife, his family, into a mess that could destroy them all. "Rick, you don't have to keep lying," I said softly. "I know what's going on. You've been gambling, taking risks you couldn't afford. And now you're trying to drag me into your mess. But I'm not going to be a part of it anymore." Rick's shoulders sagged as if the weight of my words had finally hit him. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he whispered, almost to himself. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could get out. But now, everything's falling apart." I shook my head, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't get to drag me into your problems, Rick. You don't get to manipulate me, poison me, and expect me to just sign everything away. I raised you better than that." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but the words didn't come. His gaze dropped to the floor, and I could see the fight leaving him. It was like a switch had flipped, and for the first time that night, I saw the weight of what he had done sink in. This wasn't just about money. This was about choices, about betrayal. And he had made his. I took a deep breath, my voice steady but cold. "This is over, Rick. I'm not helping you anymore. You need to face the consequences of your actions." For a moment, it felt like the air was thick with unsaid words, the weight of our shared history pressing down on both of us. And then, in the silence, I realized that I had done what I needed to do. I had faced him. I had called him out on everything. And now it was his turn to face the music. "I'm done, Rick," I said, turning toward the door. "I'm done with the lies, and I'm done with you." As I stepped out into the night again, I felt the weight of the years of pain, of broken trust, begin to lift. I couldn't fix what was broken, and I couldn't change the past. But I could walk away. I could choose to stop the cycle of manipulation, of deceit, before it consumed me too. The car pulled away, and the house receded into the distance, its cold, looming presence fading into the night. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I was starting to take control again. The car ride was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I had just confronted Rick. I had said everything I needed to say, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The weight of my decision still lingered in my chest as I watched the streets blur by outside the window. It was strange. The night felt still, but I could feel the tension in the air. The finality of my words to Rick echoed in my head. "I'm done with you." I didn't know what would happen next, but part of me wondered if it had already gone too far. Would Rick come after me? Would Emma try to smooth things over? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I knew I couldn't go back now. I had made my choice. As I got closer to the police station, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from the same anonymous number that had warned me earlier. "Rick and Emma will try to cover their tracks. Be cautious. They'll know you're moving against them. The police need to be on alert." I read the message twice, the gravity of the situation settling heavily on me. The tipster was right. Rick and Emma were going to do whatever it took to protect themselves. This was more than a family betrayal. It was a full-scale operation, and they weren't going to back down easily. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I couldn't. I arrived at the police station and immediately walked inside, my thoughts sharp, my mind focused. I approached the desk, where an officer greeted me, looking slightly surprised to see me back so soon. "Mr. Miller, what can we do for you?" he asked, his tone professional but concerned. I had already given my initial statement, so I wasn't sure what would come next. "I need to update my report," I said, my voice steady. "I just confronted my son, Rick. I know for a fact that he's involved in serious criminal activity. I believe he and his wife, Emma, have been planning to take everything from me." The officer's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for me to sit in one of the chairs nearby. "Please, tell us everything you've learned." I recounted the confrontation at Rick's house, how they had tried to manipulate me, poison me, and trick me into signing over my businesses. I told him about the debts Rick had accumulated, about the people who were threatening him, and about the attempts to involve me in their scheme. As I spoke, the officer took notes, his expression serious. When I finished, he looked up, his brow furrowed. "We're going to need to move quickly, Mr. Miller. You've given us valuable information. We'll start investigating Rick and Emma's activities right away. We've got teams looking into their financial records, and we'll also check into the people they're involved with." I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. The police were taking this seriously. They were already moving on it. But the feeling of unease still lingered. What if Rick and Emma tried to flee? What if they tried to destroy evidence? The officer's next words cut through my thoughts. "I suggest you stay somewhere else for the time being. Mr. Miller, you're a key witness in this investigation, and we don't know what lengths Rick and Emma are willing to go to. You need to be safe." I had expected this, but hearing it from the officer made it all feel more real, more urgent. I wasn't safe in my own home anymore. I needed to leave. "I'll make arrangements," I said quietly. "But I'm not going to let them get away with this." The officer gave me a reassuring nod. "We won't let them. Stay in touch, Mr. Miller, and if you have any more information, don't hesitate to contact us." As I left the station, the weight of the situation pressed down on me once more. I had given the police the information they needed, but I knew there was still so much left to uncover. There were still so many questions. Why had Rick turned into someone so desperate? Why hadn't he asked for help before it got this bad? What had happened to the son I had raised? The night felt colder as I stepped outside, the streets now silent in the early hours of the morning. I had no place to go now, no place that felt safe. I walked down the street, my thoughts spinning. Maria's warnings echoed in my head. "They'll know you're moving against them." I had seen firsthand how manipulative and dangerous Rick and Emma were. What if they tried to come after me, to force me into doing what they wanted? What if they tried to destroy everything I had left, including the truth? I had to stay one step ahead. But how? I pulled out my phone again, this time dialing a number I hadn't called in years. It was time to call in a favor, time to find someone I could trust completely, someone who could help me stay protected. As the phone rang, I found myself asking a question I never thought I'd have to ask. Who could I trust anymore? The line clicked, and a familiar voice greeted me on the other end. "Jonathan, is everything okay?" It was an old business associate, someone who had always been there when things got tough. I hesitated for a moment, then spoke with urgency. "I need help. It's serious. Rick and Emma, they've been trying to take everything from me. I need a safe place to stay, Someone who can keep me out of their reach until this is over. Can you help me?" There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice answered, firm and reassuring. "Of course. We'll take care of you. You've got a place here." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. For the first time tonight, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this fight. There was someone out there who had my back, but even as relief washed over me, I knew the battle wasn't over. I had made it this far, but the hardest part was yet to come. Rick and Emma wouldn't stop. They would try to protect themselves, to cover up their tracks, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. As I made my way to the place that would offer me a temporary refuge, I could still feel the pull of the family I once had. But now, that family was nothing but a shattered illusion. What I had to protect now wasn't my past. It was my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone destroy that. I arrived at the place where I was going to stay temporarily, an old, secure building I knew from the past. It wasn't the kind of place that looked like a fortress, but it had the kind of quiet, unnoticed safety I needed right now. A haven of sorts, a place where I could lay low and figure out my next steps. The reality of the situation was heavy on my mind. I had done everything I could to expose Rick and Emma's schemes, but the war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. I was pacing back and forth in the small room, trying to process everything that had happened. Rick's voice still echoed in my head, his desperate pleas for forgiveness mixing with Emma's calm yet insidious reassurances. I could still smell the faint trace of the whiskey they'd given me, and the image of the glass, its amber surface flickering with shadows, haunted me. They had poisoned me, both physically and mentally, but now it was my turn to take back control. I couldn't stop thinking about Maria. Her warnings kept playing on a loop in my mind. She was right. Rick and Emma wouldn't stop. If they could, they'd find a way to make everything disappear. They'd cover their tracks and shift the blame, maybe even try to bury the truth. That's how people like them operated. Deceitful, calculated, manipulative. And yet, part of me still didn't understand how they had gotten so far. How had my own son become this person? Was this the result of years of bad choices? Or had he always been like this, hidden behind a facade? The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, half expecting it to be Rick or maybe Emma, trying to spin their lies again. But it wasn't them. It was the police, the officer who had taken my report earlier. I felt a brief pang of anxiety before I answered the call. "Mr. Miller?" The officer's voice came through, sounding strained. "We need to move quickly. We've got confirmation on some of the information you provided. Rick's connections. They're dangerous. We've been able to trace some of the people he's been dealing with, and they've already been flagged by other units. We need your full cooperation if we're going to make sure this doesn't escalate any further. You're still our primary witness." The words hit me hard. I had suspected it all along, but hearing it confirmed made everything feel more real. Rick wasn't just in debt to small-time gamblers or shady figures. He had connections to organized crime, people who didn't hesitate to use violence to settle scores. This wasn't just about saving my business. It was about survival. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the rising panic I felt. "What do I need to do?" "We need to relocate you immediately," the officer continued. "And we'll be conducting a search at Rick and Emma's residence within the next few hours. We'll also need to secure all the evidence you have, everything related to the legal documents they tried to get you to sign, the messages you received from the anonymous source, and anything else that ties them to these criminal activities." My heart raced as I thought about everything I had to protect: my businesses, my reputation, the evidence. I had to make sure it didn't fall into their hands. I couldn't let Rick and Emma have any more power over me. Not now. Not ever again. "I'll get everything ready," I said, already thinking about what I had to take with me. I needed the police to act quickly, to move on this before Rick or Emma had the chance to destroy the evidence. "We'll be in touch as soon as we've secured the location," the officer replied. "Stay where you are, and don't leave until we give the all-clear. It's not safe to go back to your house yet." "I won't," I said, hanging up the phone. I sat there for a while, trying to collect myself. The weight of the situation was sinking in deeper than ever. Rick's betrayal, his desperation, had pushed me to the brink. But now I was no longer just reacting to what they were doing. I was taking control of my life, my choices. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything Margaret and I had worked so hard to build. There was a knock at the door. I looked up, startled, before I moved toward it. It wasn't the officer I had spoken to on the phone, but a man I vaguely recognized. Someone from my past in business who had come to help when things were tough. His eyes flicked to the door behind me, a sign that he understood the need for discretion. "Jonathan," he said in his low, gravelly voice, "I got your call. We need to talk." I stepped aside to let him in, and the man quickly closed the door behind him. He had a kind of quiet confidence about him, someone who had been through hard situations before and knew how to handle them. He wasn't just here to offer me a place to stay. He was here to help me fight back. "We're going to get you out of here, Jonathan," he said. "But it's going to take all of us. The police are moving, but we need to keep the pressure on Rick and Emma. They'll be scrambling, and we can't let them slip away." I nodded, my mind already working through the possibilities. "I know. I can't let them get away with it, not after everything they've done." The man's eyes narrowed. "They won't. I've got a few people in place already to make sure that doesn't happen, but we need to stay ahead of them. There's still a lot we don't know. And Rick, he's going to come for you. He won't stop until he's got everything." I swallowed, my mind racing. I had to stay ahead of this, stay sharp. Every move mattered now. Every decision. "What's next?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "We prepare," he said simply. "The next few hours are crucial. We can't let Rick and Emma get another chance to cover their tracks. This ends tonight." I nodded, knowing deep down that this was the moment of truth. The end game was here, and it was up to me to make sure it ended the right way. For my family. For everything that mattered. The tension in the air felt thick as the man I had called in to help, an old business associate, told me exactly what we needed to do. Time was no longer a luxury. It was a ticking clock, one that seemed to move faster the more I thought about it. The more I learned, the more my own life seemed to be spiraling out of control. We were going to have to be smart, very smart. There was no room for mistakes, and certainly no room for hesitation. "Rick and Emma won't go down without a fight," the man said, as we stood together in the small room, which now felt like a war room. The walls, once calming, felt as though they were closing in. The stakes had never been higher. "What's the plan?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. He gave me a sharp look, as if calculating the risk. "First, we need to secure the evidence, all of it. The documents Rick and Emma were trying to get you to sign, the ones with your businesses, your assets, the will, it's all in their hands. And right now, it's more than just their word against yours. You've got to make sure the police can take control of that." I nodded, remembering the signed documents Rick had shoved in front of me earlier. At the time, I had been so focused on the conversation, on the poison, that I hadn't considered the real power those papers held. If they got those into the wrong hands, everything would be lost. "We're going to get it back," I said, determination setting in. The man pulled out a folder from under his arm. Inside were a set of instructions for me. "You're going to stay low for the next few hours. We'll get you to a safe location. I'll handle the rest. If they suspect you're onto them, they might make a move. We don't want to give them any chance to cover their tracks." I looked at the paper with the new instructions. It was a plan, detailed and calculated. It made sense. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They were still so close. Rick and Emma, the very people I once trusted above all else. I knew I couldn't completely rely on anyone, even the police. This had become personal, a fight for survival, and I had to be the one to ensure my own safety. "Okay, I'll stay out of sight," I agreed, taking the folder and folding it carefully. "But I want to know everything that's going to happen. What's our next move after we get the evidence?" The man hesitated before answering, his voice low and measured. "Once we secure the evidence, we're going to make sure it gets to the police. Then, we need to watch Rick and Emma. They've already shown their cards. They're willing to do anything to get out of this mess. You need to keep a low profile, but we can't afford to let them move ahead without us. We'll make sure they don't run." As he spoke, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. There was something in the way he looked at me, something that didn't sit right. Was he fully on my side, or was he just as much a part of this web of manipulation? My mind raced, wondering if I was putting my trust in the wrong person, but I pushed the thought aside for now. I didn't have time for doubt. I couldn't afford to second-guess every move. The next few hours passed in a blur. I left the temporary safe house with the man by my side, my heart pounding in my chest. We were heading to Rick and Emma's house, the scene of the crime, the place where it all started. My thoughts were chaotic, jumping from one possibility to another. What if they'd already moved the documents? What if they were planning their escape? What if the police weren't fast enough? I tried to steady my breath, but the anxiety in my chest refused to relent. If they knew we were coming for them, would they try to erase everything before we could act? As we neared the neighborhood, the weight of it all crashed into me. I had once considered this place a symbol of success, the kind of life Margaret and I had worked so hard for. But now it felt more like a tomb, one filled with lies and broken promises. A place that had once been full of warmth now held nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. The man and I parked a few blocks away from the house, careful not to draw attention. He handed me a small camera and a set of keys. "Go in, get the documents. I'll be right behind you," he instructed, his tone firm, but with a hint of something colder. "The police are on their way, but the faster we act, the less time Rick and Emma have to cover their tracks." I nodded, my heart racing as I walked toward the house. The feeling of dread hit me again. I wasn't just walking into a house. I was walking into a war zone, one where trust had been shattered, where everything I had ever believed in was crumbling. I made my way quietly to the back of the house, using the key to unlock the door. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like someone else was living out my story. Someone who had to take drastic action to protect what little he had left. As I entered the house, the silence was overwhelming. It was eerily calm. I moved through the rooms quickly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I checked the drawers, the office, and finally found the safe in Rick's office, a place I never thought I'd be forced to look. The combination was still fresh in my mind. I opened it, and there they were, the documents, the signed papers, everything Rick and Emma had planned to use to steal from me. I took the documents and slipped them into my bag. But just as I was about to leave, a sound from upstairs froze me in my tracks. A voice, faint but unmistakable, echoed through the house. "Dad?" It was Rick. I froze in place, the sound of Rick's voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Every muscle in my body tensed, my pulse pounding in my ears. For a moment, everything stopped. Time itself seemed to stretch out before me, and all I could think was, how did he know I was here? I quickly shoved the documents deeper into my bag, my hands shaking as I tried to compose myself. I knew I had to leave, now. But the question was, how? How had Rick known I'd come to the house? How had he found out I was moving against him? Was this a trap? Or was this something worse? I backed away from the office door, trying to be as quiet as possible, but the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs froze me again. Rick was coming, and he wasn't alone. My heart leapt into my throat. I had seconds to make a decision. I could hear the muffled voices of Rick and Emma, but they weren't speaking loudly enough for me to understand what they were saying. I have to leave. Now. I darted through the hallway and toward the back door, but before I could reach it, a voice echoed from behind me, clear as day. "You thought you could just walk away, didn't you, Dad?" I turned around, my heart sinking as Rick stepped into view, his face shadowed in the dim light. He wasn't alone. Emma stood beside him, her eyes cold, calculating. "How did you—" I started, but the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't give them a chance to control the situation. "We've known for a while that you were suspicious, Jonathan," Emma said, her voice smooth, almost too smooth. "But we weren't sure how far you'd go. We figured we'd have a little time to clean things up, but it seems we've underestimated you." Rick's eyes were frantic, but there was a dark edge to his voice. "You don't get it, Dad. We didn't want to do this. We had no choice." He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back, my hand reaching for the door. "Rick, listen to me," I said, my voice firm. "You've made your choices, and now you're going to have to face the consequences of them. I'm done letting you use me. I'm done letting you manipulate me for your own gain." "Consequences?" Rick sneered. "You think you can walk away from this? From everything we've built together? You think I'll just let you take everything back?" His words hit harder than I expected. He wasn't just angry. He was desperate. And desperate people were dangerous. "I've seen what you're willing to do, Rick," I said, trying to stand my ground. "And it's not just about the money anymore. It's about who you've become. And I won't be a part of it. Not anymore." The silence between us hung thick, but it didn't last long. Rick's eyes narrowed, and I saw the familiar anger rising in him, the same anger that had always been there beneath the surface. The same frustration he'd felt when things didn't go his way. "You don't understand," he spat. "You never understood. This is about survival, Dad. You've had everything handed to you, your businesses, your life. It's all so easy for you. You don't get it. I needed this. I needed to get out of the hole I dug myself into. I needed you to help me fix it." "And I would have helped," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But you went too far, Rick. You chose to betray me. You chose to take everything I've built and use it to dig yourself out of your mess. You've lied, manipulated, and poisoned me. And that, Rick, is where I draw the line." Rick clenched his fists, his face turning red. "You think you can just walk away and leave us to fix everything? You're wrong, Dad. You've always been wrong. You're not going anywhere." I knew he wasn't talking just about me leaving the house. He was talking about something far more dangerous, something I didn't want to face. He was cornered, and when people like Rick get cornered, they lash out. "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice rising as the weight of the situation settled around us. "You want a fight, Rick? You're going to get one, but you'll have to face it on your own." Rick's face twisted, a mix of anger and fear. Then he nodded, slowly, as if the realization of what he had done finally hit him. "I warned you," Rick muttered, his voice barely audible. Before I could react, Rick lunged toward me, his hand grabbing at my arm. "No!" I shouted, pulling away and breaking free. I reached for the door, my pulse racing. The adrenaline was coursing through me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let this get any worse. But before I could make it to the door, Emma stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "You're not going anywhere, Jonathan," she said, her voice cold, devoid of the warmth she had once shown me. "This ends now." I could feel the walls closing in. My back was against the door, and I was trapped between Rick and Emma. They had cornered me. They wanted to make me the scapegoat. And I realized in that moment, more clearly than ever before, that there was no going back. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival. I had no choice. I had to fight back. I had to protect myself, no matter what it took. "Rick, Emma, stop," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "You've made a mistake, but it's not too late. You can still get out of this before it's too late." But Rick didn't listen. The rage in his eyes was too much to ignore. Emma's stance, cold and resolute, mirrored his. They had crossed the line, and now they weren't backing down. I took a step back, my mind racing. The next few moments would define everything. It would either be the end of this madness or the beginning of a far worse nightmare. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. "Police!" A voice rang out from the other side. "Open up!" Rick froze. Emma's eyes widened, and for the first time, fear flashed across her face. The game was up. The knock on the door hit us all like a bolt of lightning. For a moment, everything paused. The room, the tension, the escalating confrontation. It all held its breath. The sound of the officer's voice outside was a reminder that this nightmare, this twisted game my family had been playing, was about to come to an end. "Police, open up!" The voice came again, louder, more forceful. Rick's hand dropped from my arm, and I saw a flicker of something like panic in his eyes. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to face the consequences of his actions. His desperation had blinded him to everything else, and now it was too late. Emma's face shifted quickly from cold indifference to thinly veiled anxiety. The mask was slipping. She tried to hide it, but there was no hiding now. No controlling the inevitable. I glanced toward the door, my heart racing as the weight of what was happening settled on my shoulders. They weren't going to get away with it. Not anymore. "I'm not going to let you ruin me," Rick muttered under his breath, his fists clenched, but his posture faltering now. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by raw fear. He was cornered, and he knew it. The consequences were coming for him, and there was nowhere to run. Emma, on the other hand, still seemed to hold on to some semblance of control. She straightened up, smoothed her hair back with a practiced motion, and fixed her eyes on me. "You're making a huge mistake, Jonathan," she said, her voice cold and calculated, as though she could still somehow convince me that this was all a misunderstanding. "You don't know what you're doing." I shook my head. "No, Emma, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking back control. I'm not letting you or Rick steal everything I've worked for. Not this time." Rick stepped forward, desperation in his voice. "Dad, don't do this. You're my father. You can't turn your back on me now. We're family." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the pain of his words. But there was no more room for sentiment, no more chances. I had given him everything, a good upbringing, opportunities, trust. And he had chosen to betray me, chosen to destroy everything I had built. The pounding on the door continued. Thump, thump, thump. It echoed through the house, louder with every passing second. "Open up!" The officer's voice was insistent, demanding. I turned away from Rick and Emma, my mind already running through my next steps. The police were at the door now, and I couldn't waste any more time. I needed to be sure they understood what was at stake. I couldn't let Rick and Emma wiggle their way out of this. "Not again. I'm opening the door," I said to them both, my voice steady despite the chaos. "You're done. The police will deal with you." Before either of them could respond, I walked toward the door, my movements deliberate. I knew Rick would try something. He was too desperate, too cornered to let this go without a fight. But it was over. They were done. I reached the door, unlocking it with a quick motion. The door swung open to reveal two police officers standing in the doorway, their faces serious, their hands resting on their holsters. "You're Mr. Jonathan Miller, correct?" the first officer asked, his voice low and calm but with a sharp edge to it. I nodded, stepping back to allow them inside. "Yes, that's me. They're in there." I gestured toward the living room where Rick and Emma stood, their faces masks of defiance. But I could see the fear in their eyes. The officers moved quickly, without hesitation. They had a job to do, and they were ready. They didn't waste time speaking with Rick and Emma. They just went straight for the evidence. Rick's house was searched with military precision. Documents were pulled from every drawer, every cabinet, every hidden space that might contain the paperwork they were after. I stood back, watching as the police moved efficiently through the house. The weight of everything I had been through, the betrayal, the manipulation, was finally starting to lift. But it wasn't over yet. The battle wasn't won just by having the police on our side. Rick was being restrained by one of the officers, his face twisted with frustration, his mouth a tight line. "This isn't over, Dad," he shouted, but his voice cracked, the words empty now. The realization had hit him. There was no escape. The law was in control now. Emma, standing a few feet away, watched the scene unfold with a calmness that was almost terrifying. Her eyes, cold and calculating, remained fixed on me. There was no apology in her expression, no regret. She had been a part of this, fully complicit in every lie, every manipulation. But despite her icy demeanor, I could tell the pressure was getting to her. She had always been the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, but now she was powerless. The web she had helped create was unraveling, and there was no way to stop it. One of the officers turned to me, holding up a folder filled with documents. "We found the papers, Mr. Miller. Everything you said was here, signed, dated. We'll need you to confirm these documents are legitimate." I nodded, my voice steady but filled with relief. "Yes, those are the ones. Rick and Emma tried to get me to sign them. They were trying to steal my business, my life." The officer nodded, making a note. "We'll take care of it from here. You've been a big help. Please stay available for questioning if needed." I watched as the officers continued to gather the evidence, securing the documents, taking photographs, and documenting the scene. Slowly, the house began to feel less like the place I had once called home, and more like a crime scene. The weight of the betrayal was still heavy on my chest, but I could finally breathe again. Rick and Emma were being led away in cuffs, their faces blank, their futures uncertain. I couldn't feel sorry for them. They had made their choices, and now they had to pay the price. I looked at the officers, my heart heavy with the finality of everything that had happened. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But I had taken back control, and that, in the end, was all I could do. The police took Rick and Emma away, their hands cuffed and their faces pale with the weight of what was happening. I stood there, frozen for a moment, watching the back of their heads as they were led out of the house. The quiet hum of the officers' radios filled the silence, and the weight of everything began to crash down on me. I felt hollow, like a shell of the person I had been just days ago. The family I had built, the son I had raised, the woman I had loved. They were all gone now, consumed by greed, lies, and betrayal. In their place, there was just me, the last man standing in the wreckage of it all. One of the officers turned to me, his expression somber. "We've got everything we need here. You did the right thing, Mr. Miller. We'll be in touch with any further questions. For now, just stay safe." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. What was there left to say? Rick had been my son. I had loved him, believed in him. But now, everything felt like a lie. Emma had been the woman I thought I could trust, but she too had been a part of the web of deceit. How had I missed it? How had I not seen the signs sooner? As the officers finished up and left, I was left alone in the house. This house that had once been filled with laughter, love, and the promise of a future. But now, it felt like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghosts of what could have been. I looked around, my gaze lingering on the empty spaces where memories used to live. The photographs on the walls, the furniture that once brought comfort. Everything felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. I walked slowly to the living room, my eyes falling on the coffee table where the legal documents had been. They were now in the hands of the police, the proof of Rick and Emma's betrayal. But even so, they felt like the final nails in the coffin of my family. I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the moment. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by an overwhelming sense of loss. What did I have left? My businesses? Yes, they were mine, but they felt like hollow victories now. The truth of it was simple. I had lost my family. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the documents, unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. Rick had crossed a line I never thought he would. And Emma, she had been just as complicit, using me just like Rick had. A faint knock at the door interrupted my thoughts, and I stood, confused. No one else was supposed to be here. My mind immediately jumped to Rick and Emma. Had they managed to get out of their situation? Were they trying to pull some last-minute trick to manipulate their way out? I opened the door cautiously, and to my surprise, it wasn't Rick or Emma standing there. It was Maria. She looked nervous, her hands wringing in front of her, but she stood there, in front of me, waiting for me to speak. "Maria," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "What are you doing here?" She looked down, then back up at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in them before. Sorrow. "I couldn't just leave it like that," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I've seen so much, and I knew you didn't have anyone else to help you. I couldn't just walk away." I stepped back, surprised, and motioned for her to come in. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "After everything, after all the lies and betrayal, I don't know who to trust anymore." Maria stepped into the house, her gaze flicking briefly to the still empty space where Rick and Emma had stood just hours earlier. "I understand," she said softly. "You're angry, you're hurt. I don't blame you. But I've been working here long enough to know that they weren't just trying to take what was yours. They were trying to destroy you, Jonathan. You were their means to an end." I nodded slowly, her words resonating in me. I had suspected as much, but hearing her confirm it made it all the more real. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that my own son could do this. Maria sat down beside me, her presence a quiet comfort in the midst of the chaos. "You did what you could. You tried to help him. But some people don't want to be helped. They just want to take, to manipulate, to control." The silence between us stretched for a moment, and I found myself lost in the weight of it all. Maria had been a silent observer, caught in the middle of this toxic family dynamic, but now she was here, offering something I hadn't expected. Understanding. "I don't know what's next," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where to go from here. This house, this life, it doesn't feel like mine anymore." Maria turned to me, her expression serious. "You still have your business. You still have your integrity. Those are things no one can take away from you." I shook my head, the weight of it all pulling me down. "But what does that mean? What does it matter if I've lost everything else?" Maria's eyes softened. "It means you can rebuild, Jonathan. You can rebuild your life. You can't change what happened, but you can still control how you move forward. Don't let this break you." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive Rick or Emma for what they had done. I didn't know if I could ever look at my own son the same way again, but Maria was right. I could rebuild. I didn't have to let this define me. I took a deep breath, the smallest hint of resolve flickering within me. "You're right," I said slowly, finding my footing again. "I can rebuild. I can't let them win. I can't let this be the end of me." Maria smiled softly, her eyes warm with quiet understanding. "Exactly. The next chapter is yours, Jonathan. Don't let them take that away." I stood, my body feeling a little lighter than before. I had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was walking it with a purpose. "I won't let them take it," I said quietly, the truth of those words settling deep inside me. I had lost so much, but I still had something left to fight for, and I wasn't about to let that go.